All right, today we're going to be looking at drawing in Java. And so we are building a basic project with this. As you can see right here on the left-hand side, in my afternoon drawing stuff, we've got the idea that we have a controller package and a view package. With this project, we're not going to be using much in the way of models, so we're going to skip past that today. Now, in my controller package, as you can see right here, I have my regular controller where I create an instance of my frame, and I start that frame up here in the controller's constructor. Normally, if we're doing a model, we'd always put the model stuff initializing it first, but this is just mostly GUI based, so we'll go ahead and go from there. My runner is just a standard runner, so we'll go ahead and get that out of the way. In my frame class, as you can see right here, we have the idea that we're going to initialize that with a base panel and a base controller. We call our constructor, and we initialize our panel, passing it the controller. And we call our setup frame helper method so we can get that set up. With this one, we want to make sure we have a title on this. We're going to be grading this partially on the fact that our title is red when we do our Java testing for that. Give it a set size, make sure it's visible so it will actually display as we go through. And we're done with those two base classes. Those are basically done. So we're going to close past them and get out of it. And we're going to take a look at our drawing panel. Now, in our drawing panel, we're going to open this up with Window Builder. But the things you have to have, we have this shape panel that also extends JPanel. You don't need to worry about that right now. We're going to be dealing with that quite a bit. But you need to make sure you have your spring layout so you can have a layout set up and a J button that you can do stuff with. Get those put in right there. We're going to use our standard three helper methods for dealing with stuff: setup, panel, layout, and listeners. And our setup layout is just that helper method that we just dump all the grep code in from the base layout manager. But we have to make sure we have inside here, we want to give a nice color for this. In this case, I'm using dark gray. Pick a color you like. Because of that, we have some imports we have to have. So the imports we have for this specifically I've listed right now. We have our swing, controller, AWT event, which I haven't hit yet, and our java.awt.asterisk, so we can get our access to our color and our graphics components we'll be using today. Now we got that basic stuff out of the way, let's actually look at the meat of the project. So let's go ahead and let's go down to our regular setup listeners method. Now, when we're doing with this in setup listeners, this is where normally we have our action happen. So what we're going to do is with this, we're going to have a basic start so we can first get this so it'll just do something. So right now our listeners method is going to be pretty empty. We're going to look at actually how we can actually draw with Java. And so what we're going to do is we're going to add a new method to our code. And this method is part of the actual Java swing framework we're going to use for that. So we're going to go past our setup listeners, and we're just going to collapse all this right now. And we're going to go down a line below here. And we're going to do the @override symbol. And you guys might remember the @override from our Android days. It shows that we're going to be using something from our super class. And we're going to be overriding it so it actually processes it just for this. And so the method we're going to be overriding is a protected method. And again, remember, protected is the visibility only inside the class, or excuse me, only inside the package. And so it's a protected method. It's a void type. And the action, or the method name is paintComponent. Helps me actually think of what I'm talking about here. And it takes a parameter for this of a graphics object. So in my paintComponent method, it has a parameter of graphics, current graphics. If you've not already done your imports, you'll need to make sure you import your java.awt.graphics for this. Like I said, I just imported awt.asterisk because I'm going to be pulling a whole bunch of stuff out of this library today, including color and more stuff with graphics. So make sure you have this spelled correctly. paintComponent is a big thing. And there's other methods that look a lot like paintComponent that are not paintComponent. Now, the first line we're going to be doing inside paintComponent, this is very crucial, super.paintComponent. And we're going to pass it the parameter that we have right here. So super.paintComponent, passing it our graphics component we have as a parameter from this. That super.paintComponent method is how we actually are able to draw on this. Now, the next thing we have to do is we have to be able to use that paintComponent. Now, unfortunately, the default version of Paint and paintComponent, the graphics object, it's not very powerful. It doesn't give us the ability to draw a lot of really cool stuff, so we're going to make some changes to that. We're going to make a force cast on this. So we're going to use the idea of a graphics 2D object. So graphics 2D. And I'm going to call it main graphics. And the main graphics is going to be equal to a cast of graphics 2D of our current graphics. So I'm going to take my current graphics parameter and I'm going to make it so I have more control of it. The graphics 2D right here, as you saw when I hovered over that just a second, gives me access to the actual graphics more 2D control, which means I have finer level of detail and control I can actually use when I draw things. So that's a very helpful tool. And what we're going to do is we're going to make this so we can just draw a basic shape. We're going to draw a really boring rectangle. And so we're going to get that set up right here. So we're going to go ahead and set this up to do so. Now, inside my graphics 2D, I'm just going to go my main graphics. And I'm going to do dot and then setStroke. And I'm going to pass it a new basic stroke. And pass it a parameter, in this case, of 2. And I'm going to go to main graphics, dot setColor, and I'm going to pass it color.orange. Because that's a nice, really bright color, we can definitely see that on a dark gray background. And so what the main graphics allows us to do is setStroke and setColor allows me to have now a width of 2 and a color of orange that I can draw on this. And I'm going to now draw a rectangle on my screen. So I'm going to go main graphics, dot draw rect. And I have right here, as you can see, the X, Y width and height of that rectangle. And so let's say this, we'll put this rectangle at 50 for our X, our Y at 70. And let's make this a very visible rectangle. We'll say it's 200 wide and 20 tall. So we have right now the idea that our draw rect right here is going to have that happen right here with this. We're going to save this app. Always a great thing. And so paint component as a method is something that gets called automatically when we first draw this component. We can also force it to paint. And we don't do it by calling paint component. So just FYI, that's going to be a quiz question later on. So let's go ahead and let's play this app really fast. And as you can see right here, I have made a rectangle. Now remember, in our Java drawing land, and in fact in all computer science drawing land, unlike in Cartesian math where we have an XY field, this up here is 0, 0. The X gets bigger this way, the Y gets bigger this way. Because remember, when you're drawing from a computer, this top left corner right here, in the top left corner of the screen, is 0, 0. This is the height down here at the bottom of the screen. This is the width at the right of the screen. So top left is 0, 0. Bottom right is my height and width. So this is the bottom part of the screen, the max height, max width, minimum height, minimum width. Going back to code though, let's take a look at our code back in Eclipse. And now that we've got our code set up, we'll go and maximize this right here. So let's change this basic stroke. Instead of being 2, let's now change that to, say, 20. Let's make a new change to that.
Does that make it larger?
So here is my stroke of 20. My pen width is 20 now. My pen width is so big that my rectangle doesn't show as an outline. So if I change this to make this a little bit bigger, so instead of 50, 70, let's make this be 200, 400. We can see a better example of that. There we go. So now you can see what a stroke width changes. By changing my stroke width to 20, I went from this tiny little line to this much thicker line right here. And so because this is resizable, you can see that change pretty well. But even if I resize it, it's still that same thickness and width right here. So the redraw right there happens. So this one right here, because I set that line width right here, so my line width is 20, because it's only 20 tall, it just fills in that whole segment. So let's go ahead and we'll quit these micro projects. Get back to code. Now, we draw a rectangle right here with this, but we want to make this a little bit better. This rectangle is kind of, well, it is lame. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a little part to this code. So up in our declaration section, we're going to add a list. Now again, this is going to be something you're going to use to build your homework assignment. You're going to take this a little bit further for your homework assignment. Your homework assignment does more than just this. But we're going to go up here, we're going to make it private. Make sure to get off of caps lock. And I'm making an array list of type rectangle. And I'm going to be really creative in my naming for this. RectangleList. Now I have to also go and add my import for that. Extremely important to add our imports. So java.util.ArrayList. Okay, there's my array list. Now what we're going to do is we're going to put rectangles in there. Now Java is amazing. It has some default shapes already built for us. And so we're going to make it so we can have array lists in there. And so, or not array lists in there, we're going to have rectangles in there. And so this is where we're going to have the idea of actually doing this. So what we're going to do is we're going to make inside our paint components method, we're going to make it draw all of the rectangles in a rectangle list. But we're going to have some fun with it like we have before. We've made it so we can draw rectangles, just have it in there. But we're going to make it so we're going to change colors because changing colors is fun. So we've done silly colors before. We're going to do it again. So I'm going to make a for each loop. And so for rectangle current inside rectangle list. So for every rectangle in my rectangle list, I'm going to do stuff. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to draw it. I'm going to go ahead and get some random colors here. So my red, green, and blue. We've done that a few times before. So I'm going to do main graphics.setColor, that new red, green, and blue. So I'm going to change my color randomly for this. Now the fill current is a little bit different than draw. So when I was drawing it, as you saw, it just does the outline of that. However, my fill allows me to have a filled in rectangle. So if I hover over that, it's going to be a filled interior of a shape passing in that context. So I want to make some new color, and I'm going to draw it. So I have right here this lovely little helper method, or not helper method, this lovely little loop inside my paint component method that I'm going to use to actually go through, and every rectangle that I have in my rectangle list, I'm going to make it so it draws it a new color.
Have we added any rectangles?
We haven't added anything yet. But we have this magic thing of a button called Add Rectangle. Ah. So we're going to make our button add rectangles. So we're going to practice with some math.random here. So we've got that saved. What's a great thing to do after we save, everybody? Commit. And I'm going to do my standard listener. So I'm going to do my add. Okay. So I have my add rectangle button listener. It's just an add action listener. And inside this, I'm going to make a new rectangle. So I'm going to just grab some information. I'm going to make a couple random ints here. So int x position, int equals, and then again int, and then we'll do math.random. And we'll do this times get width. Our y position, it's going to be the same thing. Instead of get width, we're going to do the get height. And then int width. And I'm going to have this be somewhere between 0 and 100. And my height will also be between 0 and 100. So I'm going to randomly create a new rectangle somewhere within the width of my class that I'm dealing with, multiplying it by a width and height of up to 100. And I'm then going to add a rectangle to my list based on this. So I'm going to do my rectangle list dot add parens new rectangle, and I'll pass it x position, y position, and then width, width, height. Make sure I pass those in the right order. Width and height, yep, I did. Hooray, hooray. So every time I click my button, I'm going to add a rectangle. How big is the rectangle going to be? Somewhere between 0 and 100 in width and height. And it's going to be somewhere on my screen, somewhere between 0 in width and 0 in height. So I have right here the idea that I have simply a setup listeners, that in my setup listeners I'm going to create some random information, and I'm going to add that random information to my list. And I'm going to hit play on my lovely code. Now it still draws that lovely big huge square for me. Now if I add a rectangle, I don't see anything happening. Do you guys see anything?
No. No, you didn't redraw the frame.
Oh, I didn't redraw the frame. So what I need to do is right here, after I do that lovely set of work, I do not call paint component. Rather, I call repaint. Repaint is the user accessible method to redraw your screen. So repaint forces it to redraw. Here's my new method. Maximize my screen. And I have rectangles that every time I draw them, they change color. This line right here, super.paintComponent, really important. This needs to be the first line you have inside your paint component method. Second thing, make sure you're looping over your data structure. Since I'm using this right here, I've got that. Remember, there's a difference between the draw and the fill. If I do this as draw current instead of fill current, and I play that, when I draw rectangles, I get outlines only. So I could have inside here, I could change my stroke by passing a different number to my basic stroke line. If I make it a random number right here, it could randomly change my stroke width. Keeping that in mind, let's take a look at the actual assignment really fast. You need to make a project that's going to have the ability to draw circles, ellipses, rectangles, squares, triangles, and some other polygon. In other words, you're going to need to have at least 6 buttons. And so you're going to need to put them in, though, into a different panel. And so what's going to need to happen is you're going to want to add to your code, we have that lovely other panel, that shape panel. And instead of filling up your entire screen with it of your app, you're going to fill the shape panel screen. And so to add a panel, this is really, really hard. Everybody ready to add a panel?
I'm ready. I'm not ready.
Hit. So I'm going to go right here and I'm going to create my panel. So I'm going to say that my shape panel, and then wait a second, you guys. I'm going to go down to setup panel, and this dot add, and I'm going to pass it shape panel. Okay, now you guys, this is going to get really crazy. I'll go to my design window. There's my shape panel. It's basically 0 sized. So I'm going to go to my constraints. I'm going to go to its west constraint. And I want it to be 50 away from the edge. And I want my east one also be 50 away from the edge. But I'm going to have it be negative 50, so it goes proper. There we go. My north panel, 50 away from the edge. My south panel, 50 away from, or it's going to be, say, 300 away. We'll do 300 away from the north edge, or 350. Let's do 350. I've got my panel right here. I've got it set so it's 350 away from the north edge. And right now, I'm just going to go ahead and hit play on that really fast. As you can see, I have a panel right here. Now, as you can see, my rectangles that I was putting in right now aren't showing up on that. It's not in the panel. So you're going to have to tell it to put things in its panel. So this is what we need to do. We're going to go back to our Eclipse. I'm going to go over to my Source tab and dump my base constraint stuff where it belongs. My setup layout method. And then I'm going to go to my shape panel. And my shape panel needs to have inside it some public methods.
What? Public?
Public methods. Public, add rectangle. Public. And it's a void method, of course. Helps if I put the void type in there. Public void, add square. Public void, add ellipse. And so on. But on top of that, I'm going to have some lists in here. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Private array list of type rectangle. Rectangle list. Private array list of ellipse, not eclipse, ellipse 2D. Ellipse list. Private array list of ellipse 2D. Circle list. Okay, and so I'm going to go in here and my JPanel, I've got that. Import awt.java.awt asterisk. Import java.util.arraylist. And that's inside .geometry .asterisk. There we go. I'm like, wait a second. And I'm going to need an array list of type polygon. Triangle list. Now, obviously, these lists are going to have to be initialized in a constructor. But more importantly, I need to have inside this class, in addition to when I call my public add rectangle, add square, add ellipse, add circle, add triangle, etc., I need to have a add override, protected, void, paint component. And what does the first line of paint component need to be? Super.paint component. Oh look, there's super.paint component, and I pass it my current graphics. So that line needs to be in there for this to work. So this framework right here is the framework for the project. So when I add a rectangle or add a square or add an ellipse, I need to be able to go through and put them into the associated list. That, of course, needs to happen inside a constructor. Again, I'm going to leave that for you guys to write on your own. But then what will happen is when I click on my button inside my panel, doink, 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 my lists of things will get displayed in here. Ah! So you guys have that framework right there as to what you need to do. And so that is the beginnings of our GUI framework. So quick review of what we did today. We made our drawing panel, which is this where we actually did work. In our drawing panel, we added a button and a spring layout, just like normal. We had an array list to test this out, so we get adding it to our base thing. This code right here will be the great start to go into our other code. In my constructor for the drawing panel, I initialize my components as needed. I then have my setup panel that puts it in, my layout to organize that. But where the work happens today, again, is inside my setup listeners and my paint component. Remember that inside my setup listener, I need to call repaint. Repaint needs to happen inside each of my actions, so it knows to redraw the screen. I do not call paint component, rather I call repaint. Repaint does all the needed pieces for the entire project. And what needs to happen is when I press my button, instead of adding this rectangle right here and putting it on my screen inside the main screen, we want to have it call ShapePanels add rectangle, so we'll add it to the ShapePanel screen.